I'm going to move on to finance here. And I don't know if you can see this quite well, but you can see here that there are a variety of estimations about how much money is needed to adapt to climate change. For instance, the World Bank puts it at 10 to 40 million. Is that a million? Yes. Oxfam International is a little more aggressive, 50. UNFCCC Secretariat has a range as well. So everyone is saying, everyone has a different opinion on how much it's going to cost, but everyone knows that it's a lot more money, and that money does not exist right now. Next slide. These are some of the estimations that were put forward by the Climate Change Secretariat. In 2030, we will need to spend US dollars $200 to $210 billion per year to reduce emissions to current levels. It's a lot of money. And secondly, we will need to spend several billions in US dollars per year for adaptation initiatives, but no one is actually able to accurately predict that much money, predict how much money is actually needed so far. These are some of the resources that are available, and you can see that they're a lot less than the predictions that I just read through. Sorry, go back. The GEF is, the top two are the Global Environment Facility. Basically, the UNFCCC, a lot of the money goes through the Global Environment Facility, but there are also some other funds. For instance, most notably the Adaptation Fund here, the third from the bottom, is a new fund that is going to be, you should be looking at for money for governments to do adaptation work. On the private sector, just make a comment on that. I was reading through some of the information on financial flows, and it turns out that private sector investments currently constitute 86% of global investment in financial flows. So all of the money that's needed, 86% right now is from the private sector. As of July 2008, the global carbon market was estimated to be worth about US dollars $59 billion right now. And by 2020, this could increase to $3.1 trillion. So what is needed in terms of bringing gender dimensions into the climate change finance regime? As Lorena mentioned, there's really nothing right now. Some of the things we can do is, some of the things that are relevant is that the CDM, as has been mentioned, is not responsive to least developed countries. The CDM has not even, it's really just reached Brazil, Mexico, India, some of the bigger developing countries so far, and not many of the people within those countries either. In some of the consultations for the clean development mechanism that were held by the World Bank, one that was done here in Asia, indigenous groups were saying that the clean development mechanism has consultation mechanisms, but they're actually not being used at the local level. So there's a lot of talk about consultation with groups, but not a lot being done. Again, it's a current focus on a market-driven and conditional finance. So governments from the north are giving money to the south with certain conditions, which is not making it easy for developing countries. There's another problem with carbon offset projects. You'll hear a lot about projects that when you, for instance, came to this Congress, you might have clicked on a website, paid for your carbon emissions, and there would be a project in a developing country that would cover those fuels that you used in your trip. The problem with bringing a gender dimension into that is that there's such, women's projects are so small that they don't actually, fetch a high enough price to actually engage with the carbon market. So what we need to do, which has been done in a couple places so far, for instance in India, taking many, many grassroots organizations, women's organizations, and aggregating them into a larger group. So that's something that needs to be done, needs to be scaled up going forward. Let's go to the next slide. And again, some of what's needed in the area of finance, gender guidelines, women and gender experts participating in this, finance and entrepreneurship training for women, incorporating gender into the budgets of these NAPAs that I just mentioned, genderizing the climate funds with all kinds of gender tools, and applying a gender criteria to the design of CDM projects. Next slide. So then I'll just tell you a little bit more about what we're doing at the Alliance, and then get specifically into what I think some of you could do with us when you go back home. These are some of the areas we work in. We have 5 major areas we work in. The first is in global policy. looking at ways that we can bring gender into global policy. Secondly, in the finance mechanisms that I've been talking about. Thirdly, in standards and criteria, which is mostly done at the national level. And fourthly, build capacity at many levels with governments, UN, all these things. And fifthly, establish a network for learning and communication between all of us so we can learn from each other and share information. So in the first area, in global policy area, we have doing two things. One is that we've developed a relationship with the UNFCCC Secretariat, and we're starting to develop a gender roadmap, a gender strategy for the Secretariat. And secondly, we're partnering with governments, including the Network of Women Ministers of Environment and Ministers and Leaders for the Environment. And with them, we're trying to find language that could be used in the Secretariat at the global level. Actually, I'm going to hold up this piece of paper. This is going to be available out here on our stand. This is the language that we're proposing to the UNFCCC Secretariat, and this is something we would like you to take home, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide. In the finance mechanisms, I think we really need to start stepping up and directly engaging with those finance mechanisms. We need to be talking to the World Bank, talking to the Global Environment Facility, providing them with what they should be doing on gender criteria. And many times, governments that we've been talking to say, I'm sitting on the fund board next week. I need to provide them with criteria for how to spend this money or how to govern this money. What should I do? Next slide. Capacity building. We're developing a training module on gender and climate change that hopefully many of you will be able to put into use, and is based very specifically on the UNFCCC plan of action from Bali, on the areas of that plan of action. So it's really going to be great for governments that have to go and negotiate and learning how each of those areas in mitigation, adaptation, technology, and finance relate to gender and what people can do about it. And we'll be holding our first training of governments on November 30th in Poland this year. And so hopefully some of you will be helping us. Sorry? Oh, we're sorry. We're doing an orientation for delegates, not a training. So, thank you, Lorena. Fourthly, in standards and criteria, we have several organizations, including We Do, WOCAN, which is an agriculture organization. We have the African Network on Gender and Climate Change. We're working at the national level to look at those NAPAs and see how we can bring gender into national planning and initiatives. And then fifthly, are lots of areas of communication. So moving on to what we can do, what we all can do. And I showed this, this language that if people could take this home with them, and we'll also send it to you by email if we could. Basically, we're working with the Secretariat, but the Secretariat, like any UN entity, isn't able to move forward with any work. They're actually interested in working on adaptation and the clean development mechanism with us and all of you. But they're not able to move forward until they have a mandate from the parties at these climate change negotiations to do so. So we've consulted this language with a number of people inside and outside the UN, and we think that we might be able to get this language through to be the first global language on gender and climate change. So we ask you to look at this, ask your governments about this, bring it back to your delegations and see what they think. And if there are any governments in the room thinking maybe my government be able to support it or actually table it at the Climate Change Convention, we would love to hear from you. Next. Number two is that, as was mentioned before, we need to ensure that women actually have a place at the table. They're really not there at the Climate Change Convention. We need to find out if any of you could be on the delegation would be ideal. We'd love to talk to you about that. If it's not you, maybe it's someone that you know in your government, so that's something to look into. And also have them participate in our orientation later this year. Go home or go back to your hotel room tonight and review your national adaptation platform if you have them. It's mostly least developed countries and a lot in Africa and Bangladesh and a couple in Bhutan and a couple in Asia. But also look at, if you don't have a NAPA, look at your national policy on climate change. Talk to the people at the national level or at the local level. What are you doing on climate change? Can I help you bring gender into that? The Alliance can help you provide technical support for that. Request that gender criteria be introduced by government delegates that are sitting on those finance boards. So, some of your countries might actually be sitting on the governing board for these funds. Ask them what they're doing, provide them with the language, we can actually hand it over to you. And we're actually, we're holding a workshop next week next month, on gender and climate change finance, where we'll be starting to develop guidelines for governments, for all of you, for the UN, to be able to bring gender into climate change finance mechanisms. And lastly, get involved in the GGCA. Some of you have actually handed your card to me. Please come and see me and just touch base. We'd love to talk more about how you might be involved with us. And I've left this brochure out in the lobby there, and please feel free to pick one up so you can get engaged. Thank you so much.